When looking back on popular music history, we see that Australian women have made a significant contribution to the Australian music industry. However, this contribution has not always been recognised within the Australian society of the time. Throughout the history of Western popular music, men and women have often been portrayed according to gender constructs, which are sets of characteristics identified as being either male or female. Gendered stereotypes are formed by societies and cultures to define expectations and reflect values. While some men and women have been portrayed according to gender constructs, others have broken the mould.
Let me breathe. Let me breathe. I am only the beginning, but this isn't just a story.
The advent of rock and roll in Australia was set into motion by the film The Blackboard Jungle, which inspired a new generation of Australian music to emerge. In the 1950s, female singer-songwriters were yet to be seen in rock and roll, but in country music, there was already an established tradition. Shirley Toms was described as Australia's yodeling sweetheart and was the first Australian woman to make a solo recording. By 1950, more married women were going back to work, and by 1969, married women made up 56% of the female workforce for the first time in Australian history.
Or where I was interested in was soul, Motown music. So that's what I was really brought up on. And so the Circus really weren't part of the soul scene.
I think I was really into the Church, but I didn't even know they were an Aussie band. For me, like as a kid, like I got into music really young and, you know, developed my own taste and found my own bands that I really, you know, I really loved. But I had no concept that these bands actually were people that came from places, or maybe in my mind I just thought that everyone came from overseas.
Kylie Minogue was one of the first Aussie artists I was into. One of the first that I definitely knew was Australian, probably John Farnham, around the same era, probably 88 or so. But all the band, you know, big Aussie bands that came before that, I wasn't aware of them at all, really.
What about 1927, your sister was
Yeah, it's about the same time.
That would have been
late
88?
Yeah. Yeah, started buying music magazines and finding out all about bands, but I, you know, can't remember being aware of Aussie bands. Mental as Anything, probably the first band.
Oh, yeah.
85.
See, I had their album Fundamental as Anything. I never knew they were Australian. Never crossed my mind.
The 80s sound was a bit harder to pick, I think, as well. There's a lot of good production coming up in the 80s from Ice House and things like that. They don't sound Australian.
There's another one.
So I got my musical taste from my big brother and the radio, and mostly doing the washing up after dinner, because my brother would wash and I would wipe, I would do the drying up. And so we'd listen to Ward Pally Austin's 2UW in Sydney, and we'd hear the top 40. So of the Australian acts that made it through, and that would be bands like the Love Ones, the Masters Apprentices. We came up through a time when they were re-recording, the hits were overseas. There was I don't know, it was a union thing or whatever, but we ended up getting the Australian versions of the overseas hits, which was good too.
I think there's always been a bit of a cultural cringe for me when it came to Australian music, so I kind of kept my distance from it. I don't know why that is. Wasn't really exposed to that much Australian music as a young person. So I was mostly exposed to whatever my record collection was that my parents had collected over the years, which consisted of mostly American bands, a little bit of British stuff. The first Australian band that really affected me was probably In Excess. And I liked the pop value of it, but I didn't really think much further. And then, I mean, the most amazing experience I've ever had is playing with Midnight Oil at a Jabiluka, anti-Jabiluka mine thing. And that's the only time I've ever cried at a show. But we were in a swamp overnight, not sleeping because of the mosquito infestation. And we had to get up at 4 o'clock and go to this venue and play in front of this rock face that was being bathed in the sun when it was coming up, and we were all destroyed, and just watching those guys doing their thing and really feeling connected to what they were trying to achieve, and it was really quite a moving experience. Probably the only time I've ever been moved that much in music, actually.
I really admired Regurgitator. I felt like they were from Brisbane, so relate to them a little bit.
And it was Eskimo Joe.
Yeah, Eskimo Joe.
That was the thing, and also there was that other Brisbane band that sung Exerciser that was kind of Rhubarb, I think. Yeah.
I heard that Christian.
Yeah, that's what it was about. I'm an an exerciser, like I exercise.
Demons.
Christianity, I thought it was.
Oh.
I grew up with two brothers who were very, very on the pulse of the Australian music scene, in particular in amongst sort of the influx of sort of American grunge like Nirvana and the Breeders. There was a huge love for You and I. Definitely You and I were probably the biggest Australian influence in our household at the time.
Okay, well, when I was growing up, the very first record that I bought was Crowded House. And I know they're not technically Australian, but they're 2/3 Australian. It really spoke to me in a very Australian way, a way that I could really connect with. Renee Gale was a huge light bulb moment. When I heard her sing, I was like, holy crap, that woman is amazing. And she was singing It's a Man's World. The little lyric at the end, it's a man's world, but it wouldn't be anything without a woman or a man. You know, it's such a great song. Deborah Conway, I remember when I heard Man Overboard, I was like, yeah. And the lyric, you know, your pubic hairs are on my pillow, your stubble rings sink, your words under my, blah, blah, your table manners really stink. It was like this kind of spoken word thing, and I was like, she's a badass. I like her. Growing up in Brisbane, there was a band called Isis that were a really all-girl band of badass chicks, and they were a big, like, I was like, ooh, they're cool. They kind of scared me, but they were cool.
Really admire is the Divinals. I think Chrissy Flitz, well, actually, she's like our third cousin or something. That's really relevant. Somehow distantly related, but I think that, yeah, she's an incredible front person, and she did some really cool things, and she's badass.
I was actually talking about this with Hayley the other day, I don't know why, but just about music we used to listen to when we were younger, and kind of just realised that I would always look out for, like, basically when I looked at my old record collection, it was all just like female singers, like every single one of them, or there was a female in the band, but it wasn't necessarily why I went to them consciously. That was something that I guess listened for. And there weren't that many, so yeah, like Titus, they're an indigenous group of sisters that were really cool and I really liked. Vicar and Linda Bull, Sam said Dirty Lucy. What else?
We grew up, us two and Hayley grew up in Byron, and that informed just the Byron Bay Blues and Roots Festival in Splendour would always come through, and so we were able to have an eclectic taste, because there'd be bands like crazy bands from America that would come across. Mia Dyson.
I saw Mia Dyson at the Blues Festival. I was like, whoa, she's amazing.
Yeah, we're very lucky to grow up there.
So I actually grew up, especially when I was very little, on almost exclusively American music, which might be why I ended up wanting to move to America, but my dad took me to see the Black Sorrows with Vicar and Linda Bull singing backup, and I was probably only 10 or 11 years old, and I was just, I was mesmerized. I was like super inspired. And also Paul Kelly.
Yeah, like I used to idolise John Butler. I used to play guitar like him growing up because he was my hero. We any Triple J band I liked, basically. Magic Dirt, yeah. So we're children of the 90s, I guess. You can probably tell in our music.
Australian music of the 1960s was dominated by the rise of music television shows like Bandstand, 6 O'Clock Rock, and In Melbourne Tonight. When the Beatles toured Australia for the first time in 1964, British beat music had become the next music trend to captivate Australia. Australian public bars of the early 60s were an exclusively white male environment. But in 1965, Merle Thornton and Rosalie Bogner chained themselves to the bar of the Regatta Hotel in Brisbane and asked for a drink. Without these women, and many like them, public bars would have still been off limits to women in the 1970s and 80s, dramatically changing the path of women's involvement in the Australian music industry.
Look, I think when people are different, there's always going to be certain elements of advantage in certain, for certain people over other people. In terms of sexism, I don't think I've ever experienced it. I do believe it exists, though. I do think that there are a lot of rich white men making a great deal of money off of young, talented women, but they're also making money off of young, talented men. There are lots of structures in place that do disadvantage women, and you only have to look at the statistics across the board in terms of women earning less money for the same job. But I myself I don't think I've experienced it to a degree that's hugely noticeable. I tend to be a fairly outspoken woman. That's not always smiled upon, because I've said things that men have said and I've been hammered for it a little more than maybe a male counterpart might be.
I also wasn't interested in really what people thought of me or other performers. I just wanted to get on and do my gig, which was just get up and sing on stage. And so really what they thought, if they were at the gig, then they were enjoying it. If they were buying my records, or mine or Eurogliders records, that indicates that they're enjoying it as well.
I do remember when I was starting out as a solo artist that I would constantly have to say to these promo girls, and so you just know every 2 to 3 hours I do need to breastfeed my child, and they'd go, oh yeah, it's fine. And then they'd just kind of keep on programming things in so that I couldn't really feed. And I eventually said, you do know the baby will die if I don't breastfeed it. Like, it's kind of a serious thing. All it lives on is my breast milk. I really did have to bring that home a few times. And I remember saying to someone in my A&R department who was a father, I said, come on, dude, you know this. It's not, you just have to allow time for that every few hours. And I did a couple of interviews with the baby on my boob, and I remember doing TV and like being in the makeup chair and, breastfeeding them, running out and doing a song and coming back and breastfeeding. And one thing that really bugs me is that almost every interview, not every interview, but almost every interview says, so how is it balancing being a mum and a touring musician? And I'm like, did you ask Bernard Fanning that? Did you ask John Butler that? Did you ask Phil Jamieson that? Did you ask Tim Rogers that? Peter Garrett, all the boys in Midnight Oil. Like, I just don't see that question ever, actually. I'm sure it has, but I've never seen it being asked to a male musician, and it's asked to female musicians all the time. And all that does is perpetuate the guilty mum bullshit about being away from, that whole thing that society, and particularly also women, keep on kind of putting onto each other. Yeah, there's a little bit of, if you're a strong woman who knows what she wants to do and has clear vision for your art and your work and your album and all that kind of stuff, you can often be a diva and a bitch, whereas if you're a guy that has that strong, he's a visionary.
Ever experienced or witnessed sexism in the Australian music industry?
Yep, I've seen it.
Yeah.
I mean, the music industry is like any other industry. I think it's made up of so many different people that you've got all sorts of characters in there that can be unsavoury and that sort of stuff. It's just, it's a slice of life, the music industry. I don't think it's different because of the medium that we do or anything like that.
From the perspective of actually being in a band, I feel a lot more protected just by my position from any of that than, say, for example, especially women who work for record labels and that kind of stuff. I'm sure they would have a much different perspective on that than me. You know, I feel like I'm in my own bubble with my bandmates, and we're just a gang.
And so
we're pretty
it's
protected with the people we work with, or that we choose to work with.
Well, that's a tricky one. It's because I guess it's a part of life, really. We came from a supposedly liberated art school kind of world. It was probably living a lie in a bit just being an all-male band doing sort of writing from our own points of view.
The only time I could say that I have experienced some sort of strange sexism was when I used to dress up in a dress. I wore a pink dress for a little while. And some of the ways that people referred to me, like heckling off stage, was a bit odd, because they sort of thought of me as a female figure in a weird way, and so they would just harass me in a joking kind of way, the way that they might harass a woman, but probably not a woman in a professional position like I was in. But because of the weird caricaturing that I was doing, it was open sort of slather to do that. So I'd get a lot of show me your tits and stuff like that, which was kind of odd. You know, obviously I was just wearing a dress and I was me. But that was interesting that it opened me up to that. I'd never really experienced that before.
Not so much with musicians as with like house engineers in venues, in some pubs in the early days, when, you know, granted I didn't really know what I was doing, and so I wasn't very confident. But just people kind of thinking they can take advantage and just be nasty, I guess. You know, but like it really reflects on their state of mind and not, you know, not on me. And you know, I've definitely had women friends women musician friends who have consistently found that, you know, when they work with house, you know, engineers in certain venues, they experience, you know, less respect. Sexism isn't necessarily always something that people are consciously doing. And I just thought of something, actually. I've definitely had experiences in the industry where, like, a festival or a lineup or even a radio show is like, oh no, we've got the woman. Like, we can't have too many women artists. Like, it's kind of the token thing. But, you know, it's not, I don't feel like it's the general rule these days.
It's more of an issue for us when we were first starting off, and I think that we have a bit of a double whammy being young, and we were much younger when we first started. Holly was only 7 years old when we started playing shows.
We had to, like, prove ourselves to people before they took us seriously. In sound checks and stuff, we're like, we'll play the best song, like, yeah, like getting to perform just to show them that, like, that we're serious about this and stuff, because, yeah, they definitely kind of look down on us, I reckon.
We also had one experience of another band from overseas we went and saw, and we're like, oh yeah, like we play in a band. And they're like, oh, cool, what do you play? And I was like, oh, I play guitar, and she plays drums. And they're like, oh, I find that really awkward. Like, girls holding instruments is just awkward. I was like, okay, probably wrong thing to say to us, but...
I was actually in shock when they said that. They were a small band from overseas coming to play, you know, a pretty small gig in Melbourne, and initially I think they wanted us to play, or they wanted to support us or do like a double headline or something.
Whoever was looking after them, obviously, they hadn't run it past them because...
Yes, they had no idea. But I don't know, the timing didn't work out or something like that. And then, yeah, when we introduced ourselves, they didn't really know and said that. And I couldn't believe that someone had actually just said that to us. It's disgusting.
Just a lot of experiences of, people not taking you as seriously as they should, whether that's because we're females or because we look like we can't take control of it ourselves. I don't know, but...
I hate when also, like, I've had this quite a lot, when I get, like, my amp sound and then people just come and change it because I don't think I'm capable of doing it. That really frustrates me. I'm like, pretty sure I can do it myself.
In terms of like live sound, we've definitely seen women sound engineers. Well, actually, we've only seen one live sound engineer who was most definitely treated differently by the other crew.
We were talking, I actually said to her, oh, it's awesome to see another female sound engineer, because we just you never really see them. There's just not many around for some reason.
That was the first time that we've ever had one.
Yeah, and anyway, so we're like, oh, that's really cool and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, yeah, it is pretty good. And she was actually kind of making a bit of a joke of it, how men do treat her differently, and like they'll be like, oh, I'll carry this, and she was like, you know, I'll take it. Like if they want to lift my gear, then go for it. I'm quite capable. But if you're offering, just go right ahead.
Yeah.
So
And like, oh, no, I'll set all this up for you. You're like, I can do it.
Go ahead. Like,
whatever, just do it then.
We get a lot of comments on what we're wearing.
Yeah. A lot.
Which
Obviously we are into like vintage fashion, and it is, I guess, a talking point, but sometimes like that people are
More
just as
focused on.
concerned about asking us where we got our clothes from as, you know, what music we're influenced by. So, and I guess that isn't really necessarily a question that male bands get asked very much.
You see it sometimes in the press, but it's really subtle. I think it's so ingrained that it's like, is it sexist? Is it not? I don't know what's going on there. Personally, I don't think I have experienced it in an overt
offensive
way.
way.
No, not me personally.
It's funny, it's like when we're loading in, because we do a lot of the stuff ourselves, and like if Hayley or Heather are carrying something heavy, like a guy will be like, oh, I'll get that for you. And it's like, that's not really sexism, is it? Because it's just like being nice, but it is, but it's, you know,
Yeah,
I don't know. That's basically, it's pretty good. At award ceremonies, they have the glamour girls there, and it's kind of,
Yeah, that's
it's just
one
stupid.
thing
It's like-
actually. When you go to awards nights, they tend to still hire those sort of trophy-esque women, and you know, you sort of turn up and you're like, this is really kind of
everyone's like,
degrading,
this is lame.
You know,
Like,
do we really have to do this?
yeah.
But that, you know, that's just that side of the industry anyway. You kind of expect that crap sometimes.
Dudes just think they can just get up in your mix if you're a chick. I can't tell you the amount of times that somebody's like, that, you know, this is like this thing, has this ever happened to you, where like dudes talk to you, don't really know them, and they think they can just put their hand down there? No? Like, or just getting my butt felt, or like one time this guy was like, please, 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 will you kiss me on the cheek? And then he turned his head for the photo, and then just so we were kissing on the mouth. Just like, I don't know if that's really, I guess that's sexism. It's just annoying. That was a real thing that would happen all the time, and it happens way less now. I think there's two reasons why. Probably partly because I could be higher profile than what I was, you know, around first album, or like pre-first album, and two is probably that I don't, you know, we got a baby and stuff now, and I spend
But
way
you're
less
willing
time.
to just call dudes out.
I call them out.
Just like,
it's just because it's like someone's got to call them out.
Yeah.
But this isn't really sexism. It's just something that I noticed. I think it's easier for women to like bands that have got more men in it, or like that are man fronted, than it is for men to like bands that are like predominantly female fronted, you know, or predominantly have more female members. And supposedly, according to the checkout that I was watching on the ABC, that's a real thing that happens. Like, man products, like if you've got a product that's a man product or a woman product, the man product sells to women and to men, whereas the woman product's pretty much just only selling to chicks. And sometimes I think that in music too a little bit.
I feel sorry for my early self, or anyone starting out and having to kind of encounter what you might at first think is how it's always going to be, but it's actually not.
By the 1970s, the Australian identity was beginning to emerge in Australian popular music. And in 1975, the influential music television show Countdown changed the landscape of the Australian music industry. At the end of 1970, the drinking age was lowered from 21 to 18, and to attract younger patrons, live music was introduced in public bars. The public bar audience was described by Harry Vander, band member of the Easy Beats, as an audience that demanded blood or else. By the late 70s, women were performing in public bars, writing songs, recording and expressing themselves in the independent sphere of punk and new wave music, unrecognised by the Australian music chart.
Yeah, I reckon there are more girls around. I think in the 20 years, I feel there are more women. I've taken it upon myself to really encourage female singer-songwriters coming up and do a lot of mentoring and workshops and stuff, and often get women to do, opening acts for me on the road. I also curated an album called Songs That Made Me, which featured 15 totally badass female women last year. And we've just figured out that made over 25 grand for the Pink Ribbon campaign, which is exciting. So I've, I guess, taken it upon myself to do what I can in my position to foster young female singer-songwriters.
I think there are a lot more women playing instruments in bands. There's a lot more of that, a lot more. Where in the olden days when I was a kid, and you'd have Peter, Paul and Mary, and you'll have that, but you'd have women playing guitar, but not very often, but it'd be folk musicians. I mean, now it's getting more and more that there's that kind of approach. It's not just the woman as singer. It seems to be that was you're the chick singer. That's what it is. It's like that. Now it's their band, which is interesting. Now you tend to get more of the acts where you'll have 3 or 4 girls and a guy drummer, which I think would be an amazing experience if I could play the drums. But to be in an all-girl band, be the only guy in an all-girl band.
I feel like things have really changed in the 15 years that I've been performing. In the early days, it was always a bit of oh, you play guitar, everyone kind of being surprised. There was definitely that early sort of oh, you play well for a girl kind of thing in the early days, but that's long gone for me anyway.
Studios, I've noticed more women within the studio environment these days, and you see kind of more sort of assistant engineers and people coming up through the ranks, interns. More of them are females these days, and that's cool. And see them down the corridor, I'm like, yeah, hello, I want to get to know you because you're cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to show kind of a
solidarity.
Yeah, some sort of solidarity in that way. Because I think, in those environments, men have a very different way of working, I can imagine, to women would. So I sort of understand that it is kind of exclusively male at times, but maybe there's a new kind of culture happening within it's more female oriented or something. A different approach.
Just from a male's perspective, you see from an objective point of view that Hayley and Heather do have a bit of a with any decision that's made, it's it's not like it's chosen to be there, but there's definitely if you're a woman and against a man's opinion, there's definitely an interesting power imbalance. Even if
it's not a sexist thing, it's it still comes up. It's still a gender.
But that's just but I mean, that's something that I notice.
Yeah, I just think there's more girls in bands. I think mostly.
Can't get I think it was pre social media as well. You could probably get away with a bit more than you can now. I don't think you can get away with as much. I think people took advantage of that maybe.
Supposedly, the more women and men there are in any situation, the better stuff like sexism and all that is.
I mean, the things that I've noticed is the kind of the macho male syndrome that's kind of always there and always will be, I think, to a certain degree. I've been in many headlock positions with guys who love what I do, apparently, but are quite physical with me, and because I'm an Asian male, they kind of feel that I'm a little bit more diminutive maybe and easier to dominate, so they like to get into that position with me. And it's a weird thing to feel, to be at the end of.
As a continuation of the changing music scene brought about by the new liquor laws, the 1980s gave birth to the mainstream success of all-male pub rock bands such as Cold Chisel, The Angels and AC/DC. The 80s were a time when female singer-songwriters could express themselves on stage, but were still controlled by the male-dominated music industry behind the scenes.
Oh, do the media hinder gender equality? Oh man, I don't know. My general feeling would be no, I don't think so. I certainly feel as respected by the media as other male artists. My gripe about Australian radio is that most of the time it doesn't sound very Australian, so it's a predominantly American playlist. So I do wish radio and television reflected my culture a bit more, and certainly reflected Indigenous culture way more.
So if they want to project a certain agenda, they will, whereas a media outlets that are sort of aligned more firmly with the traditional idea of journalism, which is an unbiased reporting, tend to not adhere to sexist tropes and stereotypes when they're reporting about female artists. So I think there's a very distinct line between sexist media and media that is more realist.
Certainly independent radio stations like Triple R and plenty of, there's great music mags out there like Rhythms magazine, don't even go there. They're just interested in great music, whether it's women or men, and they promote music that they love, and they've got men and women working and writing. But I think the mainstream media is terrible. I think they promote a really homogenous view of, not just in music, but in general, a homogenous idea of what a man and a woman should be, and it's gross. Those like commercial Dickie and what's her face, duos.
Like I remember back years ago when we were first getting reviewed, it would always piss me off that I would see guys on stage like doing the Mick Jagger thing, like swaggering, and they were just being full Jagger, and I would see stuff like, totally original, blah, 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 or it wouldn't mention anything. It would say he had a great stage presence and he did this. And then I would get on stage and I'd always feel like because I was a girl, I was constantly, immediately just getting compared to other girls. Like they'd always be like, oh, she's like Karen O from the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, or she's got a bit of Susie Quattro about her. And I'd like, and it annoyed me because I would look at the other reviews and be like, I feel like it's just easy. It's just sort of like you're only saying that about me because I'm a girl. Like you're immediately saying she's like this other girl. It was just one thing that annoyed me that I felt was specifically a gender thing like 10 years ago. I don't know if it's a thing anymore, but it was like in 2005. Radio stations want to play music that people are listening to, particularly commercial radio. That's a good thing about Triple J, is it's taxpayer funded. They're not having to go after the same things that commercial radio is. But they still want to play music that people listen to. They really need people to listen to them so they can get, all of the money that they deserve. They want to play music that people aren't going to turn the station for. So that's like at the end of the day, they want you to stay on their station because they know that if you decide that you hate that song or it's really annoying and then you switch from one commercial station to another, you might sit there for another 4 months before you get the energy to change station again. And in that sense, I don't know what's first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know. And are they causing that to happen, or is it just what happens?
Interesting, and there is obviously biological differences between men and women, but when it comes to society, I think it's vastly exaggerated. Like the media is the media, and I think that if you believe that, then you believe it at your own peril, and it just reaffirms whatever the dominant power wants you to believe. So my advice is to never ever trust what the media says. Be entertained if at the most be entertained, but look deeper. Always look deeper because it's a load of shit essentially, and you really got to make an effort to humanize your understanding of the world. So while this is a documentary about gender, I think that it's a responsibility of every person to really look beyond gender and to really look at a person for what they are, which is a human being.
I think a bit of both. I think that sometimes it can be alienating men. Like sometimes it goes too far to be...
Sometimes be blown out of proportion.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
don't think it ever stops somebody from doing something because
They're a girl or a guy.
they're a girl or a guy. I think, in today's world, like I would never say, electric guitar is for guys, so I'm not going to play it. If you like it, you do it. It doesn't.
For sure.
Yes, it might sometimes make it harder, but in a lot of ways, it does make it easier as well.
I think the media will always go for what helps them sell a story. I think that is pretty much straight it. Whenever it helps, go for the stereotype. Whatever. What do they call it? Clickbait? I guess that's what it is.
It's like anything. It's these days. It's so much more valuable to say something sensational and quick.
Australian music of the 1990s saw the rise of alternative music previously deemed to be uncommercial, prompted by the nationalisation of youth radio station Triple J. Women played a major role in the crossover of alternative rock into the commercial market of the Australian music industry. The 90s also saw female Aboriginal artists such as Ruby Hunter achieving success. Because of technology and the splintering formula, female singer-songwriters of the 90s had the opportunity to challenge or ignore the expectations of record companies and achieve unparalleled commercial success.
Depends what the artist is. A lot of people try and attract attention by trying to buck the system or go against the grain. So, whether it's to be a very masculine female artist, like Katie Lang or someone like that, because that's who she is, but it's also, because it's the entertainment industry, there's a lot of attention put on things like that. Anyone who wants to make a mark in that regard can push those boundaries as far as they want.
Yeah,
sometimes it seems to be the industry for it,
Yeah, sometimes it's a lot of that you can work to your advantage.
Yeah.
Well,
that's right. I think that's what attracts most people, is that sense of sometimes blurring between reality and fantasy and all that sort of stuff.
And there's certainly men doing what is considered a softer approach to music. And I definitely think men and women are made up of a combination of masculine and feminine qualities, and that, some are more readily expressed, but that men, I think it's great, men feel more comfortable expressing their feminine side and women feeling more comfortable expressing their masculine side. And
music is separate. It's separate, as is art. It's separate from all, I think that's my opinion, is that we're not bound by, the inequality in the workplace, for example. Because if you're a woman in the music industry and you're selling a lot of records or you're selling a lot of tickets to your concerts, that's the point. That's the main point. So if you're doing well, it sort of doesn't matter what it is you're doing, and people will, managers will want to know you, record companies will want to know you because you're a sellable item, whether you're a guy or a girl, whether you're singing, heartfelt love songs or death metal.
The whole idea of gender is one of the biggest scams out there that we're indoctrinated from, of course, almost birth. I read recently that, and you guys probably know about it, but that the whole pink and blue thing was reversed not that long ago, 70s, and it was just a marketing ploy. There is a lot of propaganda and indoctrination that happens to us all as we go through life, and we spend our times, most of our time digging us. If we're smart, we spend a lot of our time digging our way out of it. In the ideal society, labels and genres and all that sort of stuff, they lose power and they don't have any meaning in the end. And that's what we should be heading towards. Obviously we're still floundering.
Stereotypes and cliches, they are that for a reason. That's because, it sort of becomes so done that becomes a stereotype. That is because it's what everyone does, and I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. And the minute people sort of start to try and take a different path or whatever, then that opens things up, and then
you might have to constantly evolve to try and change out of that as well. Once you get pigeonholed as an artist, I think that's probably one of the greatest traps for someone trying to, climb this, the success ladder quickly, is that they can be manipulated into being a product, and then sometimes changing that perception is very difficult.
For me, music is a genderless thing, so the genre doesn't really... I don't know. I'm not sure. I think men are getting more feminine and girls are getting more masculine, maybe. There's a little bit more of that blurring of the lines of androgyny, perhaps.
There's an expectation that female musicians play acoustic guitar and sing, singer-songwriter kind of style music. It's definitely not as common, I guess, for girls to be playing in a rock band. There is, it's just a fact, there is a lot more women that play that sort of folky kind of music. But it definitely is becoming more common, and the expectation is kind of changing, I think. You do come across other women that play, electric guitars, rock music. Because it's not a common thing, sometimes we've found other girls get really competitive because it's like, no, this is my thing, like I'm special because I'm a girl that plays an electric guitar or plays drums, and
when really we should all be like,
let's
stick
awesome.
together.
Like
cool.
this is great. Like let's support each other and embrace it.
I think so. Yeah. I've never seen an all-female metal band. Like
hardcore band.
Yeah, or hardcore band, or I'm sure they're out there, but they just don't ever seem to. You don't really see that many women kind of playing in bands as instrumentalists.
Well, it's like Warpaint. That's like a good example of it. So I like that now band. I think that's really cool. That's something we've got that's really adds to our ability to say anything, is the fact that there's two of each, and it just nullifies that issue.
There is, I think, the expectation of us sometimes, if people haven't heard our music and just see us, they don't think that we're going to play the type of music that we do, which is kind of nice to give them a bit of a surprise sometimes. But yeah, they're definitely.
We've had comments like, "Oh, I thought you were going to play like the
Dixie Chicks or something." But
no, sorry, we're not.
The rise of the internet and digital recording technology unquestionably had a major influence on Australian music in the 2000s. The 2000s saw women for the first time balance the gender divide in the ARIA charts for the highest selling albums and singles. Australian women made their mark as singers, instrumentalists and songwriters, achieving success in many different capacities, along with behind-the-scenes roles.
For the first part of my career, which was at Eurogliders, which lasted for 10 years, I was within the record industry in so much as the record company paid for us to make records. We got in huge amounts of debt, and we were within the motions of a record company. For the last 30 years, I've run my own, let's call it a cottage industry. So I'm still a musician, I still make records, I still sell concerts, but I've been my own boss, and so I still work within that industry. I employ 50 musicians every year, accommodate them, pay wages, hire cars, air travel, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. I do things on my terms because that's what I want to do. And so I've never accepted bullying of any description. So that's why I've never really seen inequality, because I wouldn't have a bar of it.
Yeah, that's the thing about music and music history, is that, stuff that goes on at the time maybe might not seem like a big deal or whatever, but then you sort of do this retrospective where I think maybe, I don't know if it was about 6 years ago, there was that Women in Rock. Did you see that in Melbourne at the Arts Centre?
That's the first thing I thought of.
It's like, rock chick.
That informed me.
Yeah, and me too, like looking back on it, and especially, reading lots of the artists who were involved in that. It was such a celebration of women in music, which is great, but, they never ever would have had a men in music exhibition.
Humans kind of romanticize the past, and, I'm so glad I didn't grow up in the 70s. Even though I loved some of the music, the 60s and 70s, and that's kind of like the era that everyone kind of sees as being like, wow, everything great came out at that time. I think it would have been a pretty appalling to be around as a female performer at that time. I think that does probably cause a little bit of retroactive continuation of the same ideas, but I feel very optimistic.
Whereas I guess also the industry is so different now in general, that music's so much more easily accessible, and you don't need a record label to make you big and sell records.
Yeah.
So now it's kind of like everyone is free to do whatever they want and get their music out, so it kind of breaks that barrier.
I think the biggest thing is just that there wasn't as many female musicians back then to look up to. Obviously, you know, there's Patti Smith and there was a band called Fanny. Who else?
Even like Adelita.
Yeah.
Is, you know, but
it's just that there's not as many.
But going back to like the previous question, there probably was that we
It's just
don't
we
know
didn't know
about.
of them, yeah.
And I'm sure if we really dug deep, we could probably find out about more. But they certainly weren't made to be the biggest artists of that time because it wasn't the norm. And yeah, I don't know. I guess it's still in a way it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Other things that could have happened, like the placebo effect, or you know, other information that was happening around this time that might have skewed why you know the results look like that. Because it'd be good if you could look back on Billboard charts of the 1970s and sort of go, well, that's why. But I mean, I just assumed the 70s were really sexist. I read Puberty Blues.
You have to take into the account the era's opinion, because opinions change obviously over time. Education is what changes that, and understanding is what changes that. So I mean, there must be so many people that were vilified in like decades before that are now like considered normal or considered like precursors to the norm. And it's just the way that progress happens, I guess.
That now things are changing as the old blokes like me start getting Alzheimer's and forgetting what happened. Everything is rewritten, is revised. That's like them wanted to take the statue of Cecil Rhodes out at the university in Oxford, and whether you can judge it, that's fine. But the facts need to be ascertained. How many girls were in band? How many girls were in crews? How many girls got the breaks with record companies? You know, did the girls who weren't beauty queens have singing careers? All of those sort of issues. That should be a statistical thing, like the go-betweens at Triffids, who didn't have much, who mostly did their work overseas, but they have assumed probably their rightful position now due to people writing about it or discovering it for the first time.
It's Australian rock especially is a very male thing.
Yeah, a music poll the other day, like a big radio station, and yeah, every band was like a rock band, like AC/DC times 10. I mean, AC/DC are great, they're all great, but it's just like there's no variation. It's just like years and years later, it's like, you know, it's like the classical music station still putting Mozart on.
Yeah, I think it does. Whenever there's 100 greatest albums of all time, there's like 2 girls on it, you know. There are lots of reasons for that. You know, feminism is still, I mean, I am a feminist, but and it's not a dirty word. Some people still think of it as a dirty word. I mean, a feminist is just someone that believes they're equal to a male, in my mind. You know, having a husband be the stay-at-home carer and me being the main breadwinner, that didn't happen as much, anywhere near as much as it does now. You know, nowadays, for example, just say something like the ARIA Awards, Best Female Artist is usually 5 unbelievably great artists, you know, and Best Male, I don't reckon they're as awesome. So, no, I'm joking. But, you know, there's certainly women making incredible art in Australia now. So it's an exciting time that in 30 years they'll look back on and say Best 100 Albums, and of course there'll be way more women in there.
Societal expectations have shaped the opportunities presented to women as professionals, and in turn, female singer-songwriters have influenced the Australian music industry. This is why, through their portrayal of the female perspective in music, they represent the forefront of women in Australian society. Australian culture has strongly influenced and dictated the roles women could play within the Australian music industry, and therefore silently shapes how female singer-songwriters choose to express themselves, now and into the future.
I mean, we did a festival a few weeks ago, just hanging out, you know, in the backstage. And I mean, you know, quite often I'm the only girl at gigs or whatever. But then I also play in an all-girl band, but the Jeb's drummer is in that band as well. And I mean, we've been on a tour where he's been the only boy, like, you know, for weeks at a time. So it's like it's all out there.
So before, it's not like anyone's like, oh no, I can't be in a rock band because I'm a girl. Like, it just is what it is.
So unfortunately, like, our worst enemy is culture internalized, and not necessarily like anyone sort of saying you can't do that. Like, it's very rare that someone comes along and actually says you can't do that. But what we feel inside from watching and growing up in a culture where women are idolized for their looks and not so much for their talents. And even if they're idolized for their talents, they're also idolized for their looks. Like, there's this real thing there. Or the challenge is, how do we raise girls and boys to have like healthy self-images and to feel that they can do anything.
It's actually just, these days it's really hard to like take a step forward and do something proactive politically, and it's like you'll just be hated on straight away.
Sometimes I think maybe it's more productive not to engage directly in something like feminism, just put your head down and work really hard. Or
set an example.
Yeah, or actually engage in it and get really hectic and talk about the issues head on, and like it's
everyone has a different constitution for conflict. Like some people on Twitter can like do something and cop that abuse for like months and be okay. But some people are quite sensitive, and I think you just got to find the right way for you to do something meaningful. Because we did something once for the Julie Gillard, that menu that came out that was really sexist, and we just like posted something on Facebook, and it was crazy the amount of vitriol we received for that. We're not like exactly strong people in that respect. I admire anyone who just dedicates themselves to say if they're a feminist and writes and works for the cause, because it's very brave to do that. This day and age, because everyone's so ready to hate you for anything you do.
I think also you can't be too sensitive at the same time. You have to toe the line of, you know, being that and also just not caring and just doing what you want.
Is to own your sexuality and to honour your sexuality. Women that are not afraid to be sexy, I find that really sexy and empowering. When I watch music videos, so often I'm just like, what are you doing? You know, like, that's just... I don't want to see that, and I don't have a daughter, but far out, if I had a daughter, I would have a lot of difficulty explaining why women feel they have to do that to sell music. You know, well, I'm talking about, you know, obviously incredibly scantily clad people, basically nude, selling sex to sell music. But then I loved Madonna growing up, and so I think she did it in a way that was different. There is still quite a focus on the physical more with women musicians. I still think a little. Even the other day, someone was talking about Courtney Barnett, saying, "Oh, you know, it's just so great that she doesn't wear makeup and she just wears t-shirts and all this kind of stuff." And I was like, yes, but the fact that we're even having this conversation is, you know...
Whether it's a Eurogliders pop song or a beautiful jazz song or, you know, a really raunchy blues song, my job is to actually capture your imagination. So as a singer, I believe I have to find some truth in the story I'm telling. If that story relates to me, then I can honestly tell it to you with a degree of truth and honesty. And I think, if anything, that's what people enjoy. I think. I don't know. I don't really know. I'm not 100%. I'll only be doing it 4 years.
So the way that our industry is set up, big lumps of people, I mean, it used to be quite full on, and we used to get quite intimidated, but when we first started, it was a bit different to art school, which was mainly lots of feminist women and a few of us blokes just watching what we said. They're out in the real world amongst full-on crew guys and all this sort of stuff. It was different. We went straight from that to that. So, and I think those structures are still here.
Breaking down gender stereotypes in Australian music. I think taking this baby on tour That's we're doing
it's
it.
Like
That's
we're
the
breaking
good
some
stuff.
stuff.
I think we're breaking some stuff. We're always just like taking her around, taking her to interviews, and when we did Take 5 with Zan Rowe, and she was like, I've never done an interview before with the baby at the radio station, but what else are you gonna do? I feel like if you're the lead singer in a band and you're a lady, and then I mean you might be able to give it to your husband if you are, but then you're on stage. So we always have someone on stage, but we need to take her on the road. It's like hard with breaking down gender stereotypes because I never know where it fits in with what I actually want to do.
Careers also are usually so short. Like it's like you don't get much of a chance.
You're just a brick in a wall, you know, of just doing something good towards it, I guess. When you're a girl, sometimes in a band, you don't know whether you want to be really masculine on stage and just be like, I can do the guy stuff, or whether you want to be the girl on stage because you are actually just a girl, and I guess it's just you fit somewhere.
I guess the most important thing is to try and focus on being who you are and being honest, and not relying on the sexualization of what you do, be you man or female really, and not relying on stereotypes to sell your product. But I mean, me saying that and people who want to make money doing that, it's like a different, like everyone has to make that choice themselves. I can't tell people to behave in a certain way or do a certain thing. But I do think that industry does corrupt, and you've just got to be aware of the way that it manipulates people and exploits those things.
I think just keeping discussion open is important. Not going, that's an old, reverting to the kind of the idea that feminism is a thing from the past that we don't need anymore, that sexism doesn't exist anymore, that kind of thing. Keeping discussion open so that we know that even though the offences may have changed and may be a little more insipid, they're still going on. Discussion is important. I think that's the way forward.
Hey, what's up? What's next for you? Dickens called it the cliffhanger, but I'm just one of those Shakespearean chicks who don't know when to quit. The odds are stacked against us, always trying to impress. Nothing's harder than convincing yourself